Hi, everyone. Today we're publishing the last episode of this podcast series during our holiday giving drive. There are 10 days left to support the drive, so if you have given already, thank you so much for supporting us and helping this podcast survive and get to all the people who listen to it. The online drive ends on the 31st, and we'll accept checks for about 10 days after that, so if you are planning to mail in a check, that's also totally fine, and you have plenty of time to do it. This podcast is free and available to everyone because those who are able to make a donation to the Institute or purchase something from our online store, do so. So if you can support us, please do. It really helps. Also, there's just a bunch of things going on, so I'll run through it kind of quickly. Analyst training program is accepting applications through January 15th. More information is available on our website. We have 2 webinars open for registration right now, although, not everyone is thinking about January right now. And then our holiday sale will also run through the 31st of December, which is 20% off all downloads. Just use the code HOLIDAY on the card page before checkout. Okay, thanks. Welcome to the Jungian Anthology podcast from the C.G. Jung Institute of Chicago. Jung in the World, C.G. Jung the Modernist with Roula-Maria Dib. Patricia Martin, who's interviewing Roula-Maria Dib today, is going to introduce her, so I'll just say for a full bio and links to things she's doing, check the show notes. Okay, and let's jump right in.
Hello, this is Patricia Martin, and welcome to Jungian Anthology. I'm a professional affiliate at the C.G. Jung Institute of Chicago, and I'll be your host today. In this series, we'll be talking with people whose work intersects with Jung's ideas to tell a more contemporary story of his enduring impact in a brave new world. Today on Jung in the World, we have Roula-Maria Dib, a professor of English at the American University in Dubai. She views Carl Jung as a modernist and has written about the power of the modernist moment in history to give rise to the discipline of psychology. Her book, Jungian Metaphor in Modernist Literature, creates a new context for understanding Carl Jung's work and his most important theories in the context of the collective in which he lived. Hello, this is Patricia Martin. Today I have with me Roula-Maria Dib, Assistant Professor of English at the American University of Dubai. And Roula-Maria, you study Jung, Carl Jung, from the perspective of him as a writer and in the context of being a modernist writer. So that's another aspect of it. Through which you see the work of Carl Jung, and not only the work of Carl Jung, but Carl Jung the man. And that's the question I had as I was reading through some of your work. So tell me first how you think that looking at Jung as a writer and at his work as literature, how does that give you a different perspective on Jung the man?
Okay, well, the thing is, I don't think we can separate the two. Jung the man and Jung as a literary figure are one and the same, and this is because Jung as a literary scholar, I find that whatever Jung found to make up the person is the road to art, and it's the road to expressing those archetypes, those energies that we have in. So, for example, literature and other fields that are similar, art fields, they're all called the humanities. So it's everything that makes us human, everything that Jung experienced as a person, kind of led him towards that road as well. So as we can see in his Red Book, for example, which is a creative work, and it was also a work that was considered very highly personal, and at the same time, it was it was a basis for most of his theories.
So you also talk about Jung as in his age, and so many Jungian scholars talk about Jung the man as a more internal person. You know, he was very focused on his inner work. He spent a lot of time alone. He wasn't out in the world in the way you might consider other people, other scholars of his time. So for this very introspective writer, you still place him as a modernist. So what I'm curious about first is, explain to me what you mean by that, about being a modernist.
Okay, so well, if we look at the early modernist period, or let's say the 1900s Europe, we see that it went through Europe went through an era of revolutionary changes, which affected all aspects of life. So there we had Sigmund Freud inventing psychoanalysis, Max Planck founding quantum physics, the Wright brothers. Not so far from that, went on their first airplane flight. Albert Einstein developed the theory of relativity, and we had Cubism and Pablo Picasso, Kandinsky also inventing abstract painting, and also the first composition of what we call atonal music was written during that time by Schoenberg. And of course, the First World War began in 1914, and then we had the Russian Revolution in 1917. So there was this revolutionary spirit. There was the spirit of making it new, and the revolution was happening in many different fields. Well, to use the Jungian term, there was a synchronistic connection. They all went towards exploring this inner, this hidden, this abstract, and more fundamental realm of the world. So, the inner world was a big thing, whether it was in discovering psychoanalysis or even quantum physics, the new form of modern art and all that. So this sense of the revolution it's rooted in the inner world, in exploring what is hidden and what is more abstract. For example, quantum physicists discovered the non-empirical realm, and they spoke about it. Modern artists, they stopped using verisimilitude. They started looking at the essence of things behind their actual visible forms. And of course, psychologists and Jung were looking at the unconscious. So Jung was part of this. He was part of the revolution of modernism. First of all, because he was born during the time that coincided with all that, but also because all of his concepts were part of the modern and the modernist turn towards the subject and towards towards what was behind the surface. He saw the personal and empirical psyche, both the conscious and unconscious, as a function of the equally transcendent collective unconscious. He also resonates well with the spirit of the times, and he was actually able to influence people in a moral, psychological way, because he didn't only look at the empirical side of things, but he also focused on the spiritual. And like many modernists who broke with the 19th century styles by borrowing lots of elements from the past, he did the same. So by looking at medieval works, by looking at mythology, I find it here that modernism embraces Jung, who found in mythology and alchemy and medieval texts a way to find the psychic coherence when beset by the loss of traditional forms of things, traditional beliefs, religion, and all that. So he comes to, he probably realizes, or helped people realize, that modernism was a great investment in shattering traditions that no longer seem to function culturally. For example, although he was not a fan of modern art, as we know from his essays on Ulysses and Picasso as well, or modernist writing, but Jung appreciated it, and he found that the fragmentation and the manipulation of reality that we see in modern art is a sort of collective manifestation of the heart of the moment, the artist's cultural moment in modernism. And since the artist, and by the artist I also mean the writer and anyone else pursuing an art, since the artist follows the this current of collective life, as he calls it, stemming out of the collective unconscious, he also comments on how the modern artist who creates these distortions creates them for creative purposes and healing purposes as well. So instead of seeing them as a sign of insanity, which he did somehow in the beginning, he somehow came around and found destructiveness to be where the writer and the artist finds unity in his personality, the unity of his artistic personality, as he said. So
are you saying there that, excuse me, are you saying there that art is part of an expression that makes us whole? It, engaging the imagination, which is a theory of Jung's as well. Active imagination is a way to kind of work out things that we can't articulate in any other way. And so am I hearing you right to say that some of his expressions and writing and other people of his time, it was a way to make themselves whole in a modern world?
Right. It was a way of making themselves whole, starting with acknowledging the brokenness that they were suffering from. So this distortion of reality, this no space, if you want to call it, for verisimilitude and expressing reality in a mimetic way. This is a reflection of a different reality, not the physical reality, not the reality that is out there, but the reality that is inside. So, I mean, as we said, there were the world wars, there were lots of revolutions, concepts were being shattered. And in the process as well, people were getting hurt. They were being confused. They were feeling out of place. They were feeling a lack of spirituality. So expressing this in art, and the active imagination as well. So what he calls psychic synthesis in his essay on Ulysses. This was a healing process, or part of the individuation process as well.
So I read something recently. It was in Deirdre Baer's biography of Carl Jung. And she makes the case that Jung was very intentional, actually, about his style of writing. And Maria von Franz also underscored that it wasn't a random exercise, because I think everyone pretty much agrees that many of the modernists, Ulysses was written by James Joyce, and most people consider it one of the most difficult novels to read. It was difficult work. Proust was difficult because they're dealing with a lot of abstraction. So, von Franz said that this was purposeful, the way that Carl Jung wrote. What do you make of that?
You mean his work, the collected works?
Yes, his work is, I when I talk to colleagues at the C.G. Jung Institute of Chicago, there's a lot of discussion about the accessibility of Carl Jung. And I think many of the institutes around the world, they exist to kind of explain the work, the written work. I mean, the text is what we have. So I'm curious, what do you make of his writing style?
Well, if we look at the collected works, we can actually see it as both, we'd see them as a modernist work of literature and at the same time, a modernist work of science. And maybe that's where the intentional factor comes in as well. I mean, he wants to teach, but he teaches by demonstrating. The collected works demonstrate a psychology that is centered around the creative unconscious as a source of meaning, as a source of feeling, as a source of value. If we look at the volume 15 of the collected works, for example, the one on the spirit of man in art and literature, Jung does not really write about the psyche. He performs it, he enacts it in his writing. Again, his essays on Picasso and Ulysses especially show that. In Ulysses, for instance, he shows the process of his psychic synthesis after suffering from boredom and from not being able to understand or appreciate the extremely difficult novel. But ultimately appreciating Joyce's work. So yes, there is this factor of he was being intentional, but at the same time, he was showing us in a way that is similar to real time, his suffering, the reading process, the level of engagement that he was making, and then what he got out of it. So this is the work that he didn't like. This is what he called the moving from eschatology to scatology. So, but he shows to us how he eventually comes to not really understand, but appreciate it in a way that is very, very intentional. So, he also beautifully expresses, the turn to myth as an essential factor for narratives and for understanding the psyche. And yes, I mean, his work is creative, but at the same time, it is scientific. And as you say, it is intentional, but in a more demonstrative sense. He wants to show how mythological expression is more exact. So this is why he uses the creative methods rather than the typical language of science, which he doesn't completely move away from, but he's not particularly stuck in it.